Hello my friends and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be sort of like a catching up. What have I been up to this month? It is currently the last day of April, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it's May and I haven't been reading all that much. Now if you recall, back a few months ago, I think back in December, I told you that I was not going to be posting as many videos on YouTube this year. I just want to kind of take a break from it. So the plan for this year was to take some time away from YouTube and start reading Stephen King. Well, as you know, plans always change. So I thought after 2022 reading 60 books, I wanted to kind of cut back on that a little bit. And so I didn't immediately start reading in January. I decided to take a few weeks off and I wanted to wait until Grady Hendrix's new book, How to Sell a Haunted House, came out at the end of January before I started Stephen King. So I waited and I read that, and that was the last video I did. So if you haven't seen that one, definitely go check it out. I'll link it up here. And yeah, so that was the first book I read in 2023, How to Sell a Haunted House. If you want to see my thoughts on that, go watch it. So where am I at currently? How many books have I read so far this year? 6. Yes, that's it, 6 books. I actually started the 7th one last night, but I'll tell you a little bit about each of the books that I have read. I'll start in February with a book that I wanted to reread for the first time. I first read this book in 2018 when it was first released. This was before I knew what was what in the horror book community. But I read it and I enjoyed it. I didn't really like the ending that much, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So after I finished How to Sell a Haunted House, I thought, well, I need to wait until the movie Knock at the Cabin comes out so I can reread Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World. So like I said, this was a reread for me, and I actually really enjoyed it a lot more this time, especially after watching the movie. And I ended up bumping this up from a 4 to a 5. So yeah, The Cabin at the End of the World. I absolutely love this story. It is a story about Eric and Andrew and their adopted daughter, Wynn. They're in a secluded cabin in northern New Hampshire. They're on a little vacation when all of a sudden 4 strangers show up at their door, invade the cabin, and take them hostage. But they're not really trying to hurt these people. They don't want to be there any more than the couple and Wynn wants them there. But they have a duty to humanity, and their duty is to make sure that one of Andrew, Eric, or Wynn sacrifices themselves in order to save humanity, because if they don't, the end of the world will happen. So most people know how this story plays out, what the ending is like. The ending, without giving any spoilers away, is very ambiguous, and that a lot of people had a problem with. And I was one of those people until I saw the movie, because the movie plays out very, very closely to this, except for the end. I'm not going to say what happens, but there is a definitive ending in the movie while there wasn't in the book. So after I watched the movie, I reread it. Like I said, it had been 5 years, almost 4 or 5 years since I read it. Absolutely loved it. I think the ending worked perfectly this time. And this may be a little spoilerish if you haven't read the book or seen the movie. Just be forewarned that this little part does have some spoilers. Okay, so I think the ending in the book where they don't end up sacrificing either one of themselves, and so they're like, well, what's going to happen? What if it's true? And they say, well, then we'll face whatever comes together. You know, we as the reader don't know what's going to happen any more than Andrew and Eric. And I think it just is a great story. I loved all the characters in this. If you've not read it, definitely go check it out. Like I said, this was my 2nd book of the year and my 2nd 5-star of the year. Speaking of 5 stars, out of the 6 books that I've read so far this year, 5 of them have been 5 stars. So I'm off to an excellent start. And just to be forewarned, Grady Hendrix does make most appearances in this video. In fact, The next three books I have to show you are all Grady Hendrix books. So after I finished The Cabin at the End of the World, I got to thinking again. I was like, you know, I only have three more books by Grady Hendrix that I need to read, and I don't want to wait until after I finish Stephen King because that's going to take a long time. And I thought Grady is the one I want to read from the most, so I'm just going to go ahead and read the rest of these, and then after that I'll start Stephen King. Which one did I pick up first? That's going to be We Sold Our Souls. This came out in 2019, and it is the Grady Hendrix book that I was looking forward to reading the least, because I really didn't care much about reading about a heavy metal band who sells their soul to the devil in order to become successful and famous. It just didn't really appeal to me, but I will say this book really surprised me. I thought the main character, Chris, was fantastic. She is a very strong female lead character. So back in the day, Chris and four other males started this band called Dirtwork, and they were all friends, and they tried to make it big, and they almost did, except one of them, the lead singer, got in a fight and got them thrown off this big tour that was going to make them famous, and things kind of went downhill from there. So this story picks up in, I guess, like 20 years after all that happened, with Chris, and she is working at a motel. She hates her job, she hates her life. She doesn't get along with her brother. She no longer has contact with the people in the band. The lead singer went off to do his own thing. He started his own band called Coffin. He became very rich and very famous and very successful, while the others did not. So the lead singer's name was Terry. Well, Terry is doing a farewell retiring tour, and that sets Chris off on a mission, sort of. She just wants to see how her fellow bandmates are getting along, because there are certain parts of contract night back in the day that Chris can't remember. And so she goes to see one of her old bandmates, and he has been acting very strangely, according to his wife. He's secluded himself in the family basement, and so Chris goes down and visits with him, and things happen. It really surprised me. I don't want to tell you too much about it, honestly. It is a very, very fast-paced story. I mean, it's not all action. It's very character-driven also, but this is definitely one of my favorites from him, I would say. I love the cover of that also. I also love the way that this story ended. I thought it pretty much wrapped up perfectly. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. If you haven't read this one yet, definitely check it out. So the next Grady Hendrix book I picked up was Horror Store. This was his first commercially published book, and it came out almost 10 years ago now. Actually about 9 years ago this year. Horror Store was Grady's first book, and it pretty much shows. This is the book I enjoyed the least so far out of all of these, and I actually gave this one 3 stars. I knew going in what this story was about, okay? It is about a haunted IKEA-like store, and we follow an employee named Amy, and she is very unhappy in her job, like so many of us, you know. She's afraid she's going to get fired, so she's trying to avoid her manager. I forget his name now, but the manager ends up finding her, and he asks her, as well as another employee, to work a secret night shift job with him because their store is having some problems. Overnight, a couple of displays have been vandalized, some furniture is being damaged and whatnot. So the manager thinks that they have somebody that's breaking in at night and making themselves at home. So he needs some employees to help him find out what's happening. So they agree to it. Amy is wanting to transfer out of this store very badly, and he promises that he will give her a glowing recommendation if she does this job, and she needs the extra cash anyway, so she agrees to go do it. 2 other employees end up showing up at the store that night. They are trying to capture a ghost on film. They think there are ghosts in the store. They do come across another guy that has been hiding in the store, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is, like I said, the store is actually haunted. So there are some good moments in this story, don't get me wrong. There's one where a couple of them are looking through the store, and I think the lights go out and then the emergency lights come on, and so they had their little camcorder thing, but what they are seeing on the film is not matching what they are seeing around them. It's like a different part of the store. So it starts off very strangely, but what didn't really work for me was the characters. Now, Grady has gotten a lot better at characterization. I will say all of his other stories, he really does a good job at it. This one, I didn't really connect with any of the characters. I didn't really care about Amy or what was happening in the store. A lot of it was very far-fetched, and I know it's supposed to be like a cheesy B horror movie type of story. However, I just thought it was very much a stretch, and I just didn't really care what was happening. And I didn't really like the ending either. I just didn't really love this one, but it's Grady. He's one of my favorite authors now, and so I'm definitely going to keep this, but it's definitely not my favorite. However, if you are a Grady Hendrix fan, a lot of people seem to like this one. It just didn't work for me. Maybe it was because I read We Sold Our Souls first, or maybe I just wasn't in the mood for this type of story. Maybe it was the format, because it is a bigger type of book. But whatever the case may be, it was just okay. I mean, I might read it again one day. Yeah. So 3 stars for Horror Store. So the last book that I read from Grady Hendrix is one that is considered by many to be the holy grail of horror from the 70s and 80s. It's kind of like the horror Bible right now. That is Paperbacks from Hell. This is all about horror stories that came out in the 70s and 80s. And it has a lot of pictures in there as well, showing different book covers. And he talks about all these books, not in great detail, but enough to where you just want to keep reading and discover about these books. So he does tell you a little bit about them, and they're categorized as like demons, creepy kids, animal attacks, haunted houses, just all type of different subgenres of horror. I really love this one. 5 stars easily. I mean, the artwork from the 70s and 80s for these covers is impeccable and unmatched. You can't find anything like this, at least in the traditional publishing world these days. But this was a really good read. Grady does inject his kind of humor in with the real life truths of these books and the time periods, and it's just very interesting, and I would definitely like to read it again. There are a few books that I got out of this that I would like to read, and one that I actually have already picked up, and I'll save that for another video. But yeah, if you have not read this one, you definitely need to. It's very interesting. I personally don't think horror stories from the 80s are all that for me. They're very gross, they're very disturbing and incestual, and I don't know, it's just crazy. But very interesting read. I absolutely loved it. Okay, so I read those 3 Grady Hendrix books in March. So a few weeks went past, and I'm like, okay, it's time to start reading Stephen King. You know, I'm just very nervous about starting it. I've tried this once before I started my YouTube channel. It's probably like 2018, somewhere around there. And I got up all the way to The Stand, which is only like the 7th or 8th book in his catalog. And I only read like a few pages, and I was very intimidated at that time. So I put it down and I never went back. And I think I'm kind of worried that that's going to happen. Either I'm going to get so far into this and just get burned out, or maybe I find out that Stephen King is not my favorite author, which would seem very far-fetched in my mind, at least, that he would not still be. So I've only read 13 of his books before, but like I said, the first 7 or so books, and then here and there throughout the years, I think I've read stuff like Desperation and Under the Dome. And the last book I read of his was The Bizarre Bad Dreams back in 2015. So all that's to say is I'm very nervous. So obviously I have kept putting it off and putting it off. And finally, just a couple of weeks ago, actually, probably mid-April, third week of April, decided I'm just going to pick it up and just look at it. So I picked it up and I read the first few pages and I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this now. So I did finish Carrie, the first Stephen King book that was published in 1974. And this was actually my third or fourth time reading this. So I know this story super well, not only from reading it a few times, but also watching the 3 movie adaptations over the years. I know this story very well. But yeah, Carrie, still love it. Still love it. I do kind of want to do a video for this book, just talking about it, not like in great detail about the plot or anything, because I think everybody knows this story inside and out. But I do want to talk about some like interesting facts about it, maybe like do some kind of little quiz throughout the video, asking just random obscure things you may or may not know, like Carrie's father's name. Do you know it? I'm not telling you what it is in this one. But yeah, I think that would be just kind of fun just to go through and talk about it a little, because I do have thoughts about it. So I'm not going to give you anything else regarding this. I finished it, loved it, and the 7th one that I've read this year, the second one in Stephen King's catalog, is Salem's Lot. So I did start that one the other night. So those are all the books that I have read in 2023 so far. All in all, it's not been a bad year reading-wise. I've read some good quality stuff, and that's really what matters, is quality, not quantity. I'm going to continue to read at my discretion, at my leisure this year, but I don't want to procrastinate too much, because next year is Stephen King's 50th anniversary of being a published author, a powerhouse in the horror community. And so I want to get as many of his books read as possible before April of 2024. So that way I can have some like ranking videos. I can guarantee you I'm not going to finish all 80 of his stories or his books within a year's time, because several of them are huge, as you know. But I'm going to do my best, and maybe I might get back into this more regularly if I find that I am not keeping up with where I think I should be as far as reading goes. But a lot of my time lately has been spent watching the horror movies that I own. Back in October of 2020, I decided to go on a horror movie watching journey where I buy all the Blu-rays I've ever wanted to own for the horror movies that I didn't have, replacing just regular DVDs with Blu-rays, and watching them all in the order in which they were released, starting with 1960's Psycho. I am now up to 2016, 2.5 years later, and I'm so ready for that journey to be over, which is why I've been dedicating more time to that than reading, because I want to get that over very quickly. I'm kind of burnt out on that, but it has been a fun journey, I will say, getting to rewatch some old favorites, some ones that I have seen but not in many, many, many years, as well as watching new ones, new to me, that I've never seen before. But all that's to say is I'm getting close to ending that journey in October of this year, so it will be 3 years to the day almost when I'll be wrapping up that journey. So I've been wanting to watch more movies, but I am going to continue to read as much as possible, as well as taking care of myself both mentally and physically. That is another reason that I took a little break from YouTube, was because I was having some mental problems and I needed to seek help, and so I have, and I feel a lot better. I'm also trying to get back into the gym, which is where I'm heading right after finishing this video. And I just got back into it yesterday, so I'm hoping it can stick with me again. I really got into it back in 2019 before the pandemic, when I became single again. I thought, I'm getting back in the gym and getting into shape, and I had a really good time back then. I would like to, get back into it, be a little healthier, and just continue to live my best life. So that's it for me. Thank you all so much for sticking around. I apologize for not being around as much this year. I do have at least 3 other videos to shoot, and I'm going to try to do those all in May. But you tell me, would you rather see 4 videos every week in May, like 1 a week in May, or would you rather it be every other week for 2 months? So it's like every week for a month or every 2 weeks for 2 months. You all tell me, because like I said, I'm going to try to not do as many videos unless it gets to the point where I'm just not reading at all and I need to get back into the mindset of this is my TBR, I need to finish these this month, and the only way I'm going to do that is by holding myself accountable through YouTube. So we'll see how it goes. I'm just kind of playing it by ear. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on myself this year, and I think that's just the way it's going to be, at least for now. So which of these books have you read? Which of the ones that I've read this year do you love? Which ones do you hate? Which ones do you still need to read? Let me know all that in the comments. Let me know how you're doing. I appreciate you sticking around through the long months of silence. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you're having a great spring, and I will see you very soon.